Bertha Alice Williams. Graham Gifford was born on October 30th, 1871, in the small town of Morse Mill, Missouri, into a large family of farmers, William and Matilda Williams. She was one of 10 children who grew up in an atmosphere of hard work and rural simplicity. From an early age, Bertha showed care and skill in looking after others. She helped around the house, cooked, and brought food to sick neighbors. These qualities earned her a reputation as a kind and responsive girl who could be trusted with the most precious thing, the health of her loved ones. When Bertha grew up, she married Henry Graham. Their union did not last long, but the couple had a daughter, Lyle. After her husband's death, the circumstances of which were discussed in the neighborhood, she remarried to farmer Eugene Gifford of Catawissa, Franklin County. In this marriage, they had a son, James. The family lived quietly on a secluded farm, and Bertha quickly became an important figure in the local community. She was often invited to care for the sick, and she willingly brought potions, ointments, and treats prepared according to her own recipes. Over time, however, a strange pattern began to emerge in the county. Too many of those whom Bertha came to help soon died. At first, this was attributed to accidents or illness, but disturbing rumors began to spread. Several neighbors she had cared for died under mysterious circumstances, and people began to whisper that kind Mrs. Gifford brought not only relief, but also death. In 1928, the rumors turned into an investigation. After a series of similar cases, severe weakness, pain, and sudden deterioration, the authorities decided to examine the bodies of several of the deceased. The examination showed that traces of poison had been found in their bodies. After that, the police arrested Bertha at her home in Eureka. According to eyewitnesses, she met the officers calmly, assuring them that she had always tried only to help the sick and did not understand why she was being accused. The trial took place in Union and immediately attracted the attention of the whole country. Newspapers called her the Angel of Death from Catawissa and the Sweet Murderer, emphasizing the contrast between her gentle appearance and the severity of the charges. The prosecution claimed that all of the victims had eaten food prepared by Bertha, and witnesses testified that she had remained at the patients' bedsides until the very end. The defense insisted that the woman suffered from mental illness and was unaware of the consequences of her actions. The trial lasted only 3 days. Medical experts confirmed that Bertha showed signs of severe mental illness, which prevented her from assessing the consequences of her actions. The jury found her not guilty by reason of insanity. After the verdict, Gifford was sent to Missouri State Hospital No. 4, where she lived until the end of her days. Bertha died on August 20th, 1951, leaving behind many questions and legends. According to official data, at least 15 people died under her care, but only 3 cases could be proven. Historians still argue about who Bertha Gifford was, a mad woman who believed she was saving the sick, or a calculating murderer who derived strange satisfaction from her power over life and death. Aileen Carol Warno was born on February 29, 1956 in Rochester, Michigan, into a dysfunctional and unstable family. Her mother, Diana, was still a teenager when she married Leo Pittman, a man who suffered from mental illness and was prone to violence. When Aileen was very young, her father was sent to prison, where he later committed suicide. Her mother soon left, leaving Aileen and her brother in the care of their grandparents. They officially adopted the children, but their home was not a refuge. Both suffered from alcoholism, and her grandfather had a violent temper, which made the girl's childhood a time of constant fear and loneliness. Growing up early, Aileen faced indifference and humiliation. She was teased at school, called strange, and gradually began to distance herself from her peers. By the age of 11, she had developed anger and distrust of people. As a teenager, she became close to a group of street kids and began to earn money as best she could, through petty theft and casual relationships. At the age of 15, after the death of her grandmother and another conflict with her grandfather, She was kicked out of the house. She lived in the woods, slept in old cars, and survived on her own. This period marked the beginning of a life on the margins, without family, home, or stability. By the age of 18, Eileen had already had several run-ins with the police: shooting, hooliganism, petty theft. Her life turned into an endless series of arrests and moves. In 1976, while in Florida, she met an elderly businessman, Louis Fell, the president of a yacht club. Their hasty marriage lasted less than a month. Fell filed for divorce, claiming that Eileen had attacked him and caused scandals. After the divorce, she returned to Michigan, where her brother soon died. She quickly spent the money she received from the insurance company, and then got into an accident that had no consequences but completely ruined her life. In the late 1980s, Warnos settled in Florida. She lived in motels and earned money by prostituting herself along the highways. In 1986, Aileen met Tyria Moore, a young maid. A strong emotional bond developed between them. Tyria became the only person close to her, and Eileen did everything she could to provide for both of them. But it was during this period that a series of crimes began that would later bring her notoriety. From November 1989 to the end of 1990, several men were murdered in Florida, travelers and drivers who had picked up the hitchhiker. All the murders had similar circumstances. The men died from gunshot wounds, and their cars were later found abandoned. The investigation noticed a pattern, and fingerprints on the victims' belongings led the police to Aileen Warnos. On January 9, 1991, she was arrested at the Last Resort bar. Tyria Moore was in Pennsylvania at the time and agreed to cooperate with the investigation by recording conversations in which Aileen essentially confessed. She claimed that she acted in self-defense, as if the men had tried to harm her, but the court found that most of the murders had been premeditated. At the trial, which was closely watched by the media, Aileen Warnos was found guilty of 6 murders and sentenced to death. Psychiatrists diagnosed her with severe personality disorders, but the court decided that she was aware of her actions. In prison, Aileen became increasingly withdrawn, irritable, and suspicious, writing letters accusing everyone around her of conspiracy and saying that she was ready to meet God. Aileen Warnos was executed on October 9, 2002, in Florida. She refused a last meal, asking only for a cup of coffee. Her last words remained mysterious: "I'll be back with Jesus." Nanny Doss, née Hazel, was born on November 4, 1905, in Blue Mountain, Alabama, into a large farming family. Her childhood was spent under the thumb of a harsh and quick-tempered father who forced his children to work on the farm from early morning until late at night, forbidding them from having fun or even attending school regularly. Mother and daughter lived in fear, dreaming of a life without violence. As a teenager, Nanny suffered a severe head injury, a blow during a train ride, after which she began to suffer from severe headaches and mood swings. She later claimed that it was after this incident that something in her broke forever. From an early age, Nanny found solace in romance novels and magazines, where the heroines met caring men and found eternal happiness. She lived the dream of true love and believed that somewhere out there, her perfect husband was waiting for her. At 16, she married a colleague from the factory, Charlie Braggs. The marriage was not based on love, but on her father's will, and quickly became a new source of suffering for her. Her despotic mother-in-law lived with them under the same roof and completely controlled the young couple's life. Nanny endured her husband's humiliation and infidelity until one day she was left alone. 2 of their 4 children died under mysterious circumstances, and Charlie ran away, taking their eldest daughter with him. Her next husband, Robert Harrelson, turned out to be a man with a difficult personality and a tendency to drink. They lived together for 15 years and appeared to be a normal family, but behind the facade lay conflict and disaster. New tragedies struck the family when 2 of Nanny's grandchildren died under unclear circumstances. When her relationship with Harrelson finally fell apart, he suddenly died. An autopsy later revealed signs of poisoning. Her third marriage to Arlie Lanning began rapidly. They met through a personal ad and were married 3 days later. In the small town of Katowice, Nanny gained a reputation as a caring hostess, always ready to help everyone. But behind this kindness, darkness lurked once again. Lanning died suddenly, the house burned down under strange circumstances, and Nanny received the insurance money. Soon after, his mother also died. Continuing her search for perfect love, Nanny entered into another relationship through the Diamond Circle Club. That's how she met Richard Morton, a charming but unfaithful man. When Nanny's mother died, Morton soon followed, also from poisoning. In 1953, Nanny remarried, this time to Samuel Doss, a priest from Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was a widower who had lost his family and was looking for peace. At first, their marriage seemed harmonious, but soon her husband began to annoy her with his demands for humility and his dislike of the romantic magazines she read every day. A few months after the wedding, Samuel fell ill and died. The doctor suspected something was wrong and insisted on an autopsy, which found traces of arsenic in the body. The investigation quickly led to Nanny. Her recipe notebooks and romantic letters to her husbands were found in the house. During questioning, she confessed not only to the murder of Doss, but also to 10 other deaths, including former spouses, relatives, and even grandchildren. At the same time, Nanny remained calm, smiled, and talked about her deeds as if she were discussing everyday trifles. The press dubbed her the giggling granny and the lonely heart's killer. At the trial, the prosecution focused on only one episode, the death of Samuel Doss, in order to speed up the process. In 1955, Nanny pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. She was not facing execution. At that time in Oklahoma, the death penalty was rarely applied to women. In prison, Nanny Doss behaved in a friendly manner, knitted, read magazines, and often joked with the guards. Inmates remembered her as a quiet woman with a constant smile, behind which lay a cold and inscrutable nature. She died of leukemia in the prison hospital on June 2, 1965. Dorothea Helen Puente, who went down in history as the Landlady of Death, was born on January 9, 1929, in Redlands, California. Her childhood was a series of trials, poverty, cruelty, and a complete lack of care. Her parents were alcoholics. Her father suffered from mental illness and eventually committed suicide, and her mother died when the girl was only 9 years old. After her death, Dorothy and her siblings were sent to an orphanage, where she faced violence and abuse. These years left a lasting mark on her psyche. Puente's teenage years were spent struggling to survive. She dropped out of school and at the age of 16, married Fred McFarlane, a military man. The couple had 2 children, but Dorothea gave them away, one to relatives, the other for adoption. The marriage quickly fell apart. Her husband grew tired of her lies, deceit, and constant scams. Soon she found herself behind bars for the first time for forging checks. Thus began her long life under many names, with constant moves, marriages, and petty crimes. In the 1950s and 1960s, Dorothea married several times. One of her husbands, a sailor named Axel Johansson, tried to help her overcome her addictions, but to no avail. Later, she opened an underground brothel under the guise of an accounting firm, for which she was sent to prison again. Doctors diagnosed her with a pathological tendency to deceive and emotional instability. Nevertheless, Puente managed to create the appearance of a pious woman. She attended church, participated in charity work, and helped the homeless. In the 1970s, she opened a boarding house in Sacramento, a home where elderly people, disabled people, and those who could not afford the care of relatives could live for a modest fee. At first glance, Dorothea was a kind hostess. A well-kept house, a smile on her face, generosity, and participation in the lives of her neighbors. But behind the facade of care lay a sinister scheme. At first, she simply took advantage of the residents' trust, cashing their social security checks and helping them with paperwork. However, over time, residents began to disappear more and more often. Dorothy assured everyone that they had gone to stay with relatives or found other accommodation, but their payments continued to be transferred to her account. In 1982, her friend and tenant Ruth Monroe died, officially from a drug overdose. Later, this case would be named Puente's first known crime. After a short prison term for fraud, she met an elderly man, Everson Gilmuth. He disappeared shortly after moving in with her. His body was found in a box on the riverbank, and Dorothy continued to receive his pension and write letters to his family on his behalf. By the mid-1980s, Puente had perfected her scheme. She would take in elderly or sick lodgers, care for them, and then they would disappear without a trace. When neighbors asked, she would say that the lodgers had moved away. But everything changed when a social worker raised the alarm about the disappearance of a client, Alvaro Montoya, a disabled man who lived with Puente. On November 11th, 1988, the police came to investigate. In the well-kept yard behind the house, they noticed fresh mounds of earth. The excavation yielded a horrific result. First they found one body, then several more. In the end, 9 people were found on the site, all of them former residents of the house. The examination showed that they had been killed with powerful drugs. While the investigation was underway, Dorothea calmly left the house, saying she was going for coffee. In fact, she fled to Los Angeles, where she introduced herself under a new name and became acquainted with an elderly man. But when he saw her face on the news, he immediately reported it to the police. A few days later, Dorothea was arrested. Juana Diana Barraza Samperio, nicknamed La Mata Viechas, the Old Lady Killer, was born on December 27, 1957, in Epazoyucan, Hidalgo, Mexico. Her story became one of the most striking and controversial in Latin American criminal history. She was known to the public as an energetic wrestler under the stage name La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence, but behind this image was a woman whose crimes shook all of Mexico City. Barraza's childhood was a time of violence and despair. Her mother, Juana Samperio, suffered from alcoholism and once literally traded her daughter for a few bottles of beer to a man who had abused her for many years. This experience was decisive. From then on, Juana felt an insurmountable hatred for older women, whom she associated with her mother. As a teenager, she became pregnant and later experienced the death of her son, who was killed during a robbery, a loss that finally embittered her. As an adult, Barras found an outlet in lucha libre, Mexican wrestling, where everything is based on theatricality, strength, and drama. Wearing the mask of Lady Silence, she played the role of a villain, an aggressive, domineering woman who punished her opponents with terrifying precision. She was known in local clubs, participated in amateur tournaments, and earned the respect of a small circle of fans. Outside the ring, she led a modest life, working part-time at markets, cleaning houses, and helping with children. But behind the routine exterior lay another side to her personality. In the late 1990s, a series of murders of elderly women began in Mexico City. All the victims were single pensioners living on benefits, and all died from suffocation or severe injuries. In each case, the perpetrator entered the house under the pretext of providing social assistance, introducing themselves as a government employee, doctor, or social worker. After the murder, the victim's money, jewelry, and documents disappeared. The investigation ran into difficulties. Witness statements contradicted each other. Some eyewitnesses claimed to have seen a man dressed in women's clothing, while others spoke of a large woman with an athletic build. The media created an ominous image of Mata Viejitas, which became part of urban mythology. The city lived in fear. Elderly people stopped opening their doors even to acquaintances. The breakthrough came on January 25, 2006. The police arrived at the scene of another crime. 82-year-old Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro had been murdered. The killer did not manage to escape. A woman of strong build ran out of the house, trying to get away. It was Juana Barraza. During a search, they found pensioners' documents, a social worker's ID, and a stethoscope, which was used to strangle Alfaro. Barraza's fingerprints matched those found at 10 crime scenes. The discovery shocked the country. Mexico could not believe that the popular wrestler, Lady of Silence, could be a serial killer. Barraza herself remained calm during questioning. She confessed to several murders, claiming that she acted in fits of rage and that each attack reminded her of her mother, who, according to her, ruined her life. The trial of Barraza began in 2008 and became one of the most widely covered in Mexican history. The prosecution charged her with 40 murders, but was able to prove 16 incidents, as well as several thefts. On March 31, 2008, the court found her guilty and sentenced her to 759 years in prison. However, under Mexican law, the maximum sentence is 60 years, effectively a life sentence. Barras quickly adapted to prison life. Thanks to her physical fitness, she became a fitness instructor for other inmates, sold tacos, and even got married while behind bars. At the same time, she showed no remorse. In interviews, she claimed that the media had turned her into a monster and denied most of the charges. Today, Juana Barraza remains one of the most famous criminals in Latin America. Judith Anna Buenawano, née Welty, went down in U.S. criminal history as one of the most calculating and ruthless serial killers of the 20th century. She was born on April 4, 1943, in the town of Quanah, Texas, into a poor family with 4 children. After her mother's death, little Judith was first taken in by her grandmother and later by her father, where the darkest years of her childhood began. Her stepmother, a cruel and quick-tempered woman, beat the children, starved them, and forced them to work around the house without rest. When Judy was 14, her pent-up anger erupted. She threw a pot of boiling fat at her family. For this, she was sent to a juvenile detention center, where psychologists noted disturbing traits: withdrawal, hidden malice, and a complete lack of remorse. After her release, she completed nursing courses and got a job as a nurse in a hospital. It seemed that her life was starting to improve, but even then, Judith was known for her cold-bloodedness and tendency to manipulate others. In 1961, she gave birth to a son, Michael. She hardly ever spoke about his father, only mentioning that he had died in an accident. Soon, fate brought her together with U.S. Air Force Sergeant James Goodyear, whom she married. The marriage seemed happy, but 10 years later, James died unexpectedly from a strange illness accompanied by weakness, pain, and convulsions. Doctors decided it was an infection, but Judias received a generous insurance payout. It later emerged that she had slowly poisoned her husband with arsenic. In the 1970s, she moved to Colorado and soon met Bobby Joe Morris, with whom she lived for several years. The man also suddenly fell ill and died in 1978, with the same symptoms as Goodyear. No one suspected murder, and Buenawano became rich again. At the same time, she changed her surname, turning Welty into the ironic Buonawano, a distortion of Buen Año meaning good year, as if mocking fate. By the early 1980s, Judy had moved to Florida and was living with her adult son, Michael. Suddenly, the young man began to experience paralysis in his legs. It later turned out that he had been poisoned. On May 13, 1980, she invited him for a walk along the river. The boat capsized, and Michael, weighed down by metal splints, drowned. The death was ruled an accident, and the mother received another insurance payment. The next victim was John Gentry, a wealthy businessman with whom she began dating. Judy claimed that John was seriously ill and gave him vitamins, in fact, capsules containing arsenic. When the poison did not work quickly, she planted an explosive device in his car. Gentry miraculously survived, and this saved not only him but also Buenoano's future victims. The investigation into the explosion led the police to a string of strange deaths linked to the woman. Tests showed that the medicine Judy gave John contained a lethal dose of arsenic. Experts exhumed the bodies of her former husbands and son. The results were identical. Investigators also discovered that after each tragedy, she received large insurance payments. In 1984, the court found Judias guilty of murdering her son and attempting to murder Gentry. A year later, she was convicted of murdering her first husband, James Goodyear, and sentenced to death by electric chair. In addition, she was found guilty of numerous counts of insurance fraud and theft. Suspicions about the deaths of 2 other men, Gerald Dossett and an elderly acquaintance from Alabama, could not be confirmed, but investigators believed she was involved in those deaths as well. In prison, Judy Buenoano behaved coldly and reservedly, never admitting her guilt. The guards called her the Ice Queen. She showed no emotion even when her own son was mentioned. Her appearance, neat, well-groomed, reserved, contrasted sharply with her monstrous nature. Janine Ann Jones, nicknamed the Angel of Death by the American press, was born on July 13, 1950 in Texas. She was adopted by the owners of a nightclub, and her childhood seemed happy on the surface. But even at a young age, she showed signs of troubling traits, a quick temper, emotional instability, and a tendency to exaggerate. After school, Janine chose a profession related to caring for people. She first worked as a cosmetologist, but soon decided to become a nurse. Her desire to save lives eventually turned into a perverse form of power over life and death. By the mid-1970s, Jones had obtained her nursing license and found a job in the pediatric ward of Bexar County Hospital in San Antonio. From the very beginning, she stood out for her high energy. She was energetic, decisive, and always at the center of events. Colleagues noted that during her shifts, there was a sense of anxiety in the ward. Children suddenly began to suffocate. Infants suffered cardiac arrest for no apparent reason, and Janine was almost always nearby, heroically saving patients. At first glance, she seemed dedicated to her work, but statistics showed an alarming pattern. The mortality rate during her shifts was abnormally high. When doctors began to notice strange coincidences, the hospital management decided to avoid a scandal. Instead of investigating all the nurses, including Jones, they quietly fired her and closed the pediatric ward for restructuring. Documents related to Jennings' work were later destroyed, presumably to prevent lawsuits from the families of the deceased children. No one reported their suspicions to the police. This silence cost the lives of dozens more children. Janine quickly found a new job at a private pediatric clinic in Kerrville, about an hour's drive from San Antonio. And soon it all happened again. Children who had been admitted with mild colds suddenly died of respiratory arrest. A doctor who noticed the anomalies checked the medicine cabinet and found that the ampules of succinylcholine, a drug that causes complete paralysis, had been punctured and diluted. Only 2 people had access to them, he and Jones. The investigation established that the nurse used succinylcholine, digoxin, and heparin to induce artificial seizures in the babies. After the drugs were administered, the children fell into critical condition, and Janine rescued them, sometimes successfully, but more often not. Psychiatrists would later call her case a classic example of angel of death syndrome, a disorder in which a person causes suffering for the sake of feeling important and in control. In September 1982, Jones injected 15-month-old Chelsea McClellan, after which the child stopped breathing and died. This case became a turning point. The parents insisted on an investigation, and soon, numerous similar incidents came to light. The investigation revealed that dozens of infants had died under Jennings' care. Investigators estimated up to 60 children. In 1984, the court found Jones guilty of the murder of Chelsea McClellan and the attempted murder of several other children. she was sentenced to 99 years in prison and later to another 60 years for causing harm to patient Rolando Santos. During the trial, Jones remained calm and denied her guilt, stating that she was simply doing everything she could to help. However, in the 2010s, there was a threat that she could be released early. Due to a law aimed at reducing prison overcrowding, Jones could have been released as early as 2018, after serving only a third of her sentence. To prevent this, the Bihar County District Attorney's Office reopened investigations into old cases. In 2017, she was charged with new counts of murdering 11-month-old Joshua Sawyer and other infants. Darlene Lynn Peck Routier was born on January 4, 1970, in Pasadena, Texas. She grew up in a typical Southern family that valued comfort, religiousness, and outward prosperity. In the 1980s, Darlie met Darren Routier, an ambitious young engineer. They married, and soon the couple had 3 sons, Devin, Damon, and baby Drake. By the mid-1990s, the family was living in the affluent Dallas suburb of Rowlett in a spacious house on Eagle Drive. Their neighbors considered them the perfect American family, beautiful, smiling, successful. But behind this picture lay debt, financial difficulties, and growing tension between the spouses. The night of June 6, 1996, changed everything. At 2:31 a.m., a 911 operator received a desperate call from Darlene, who screamed that a man had broken into the house and attacked her and the children. The police who arrived at the scene discovered a horrific scene. 6-year-old Devin was already dead, and 5-year-old Damon was bleeding profusely and soon died in the hospital. Darlie herself had a superficial wound on her neck and a cut on her arm. She claimed that she woke up to noises and saw a stranger in the house who rushed at her and then fled through the kitchen, dropping a knife. However, from the very beginning, investigators suspected something was amiss. No traces of blood were found on the alleged killer's path, and the dust on the windowsill and the neatly cut screen looked as if the scene had been staged in advance. A bloody sock belonging to the children was found on the street, 70 meters from the house. At first, this seemed to confirm Darlie's story, but later investigators suggested that the woman had taken it out herself to stage the criminal's escape. In the early days, the public sympathized with Darlie, seeing her as a grief-stricken mother. Everything changed when television showed footage from the cemetery. Darlie and her loved ones were celebrating Devin's birthday right at his grave, laughing and spraying colorful, silly string foam. The prosecution later called this moment a symbol of the defendant's emotional coldness. On June 18, 1996, Darlie Lynn Routier was arrested. The investigation put forward the theory that the motive for the murder was the family's financial problems. Insurance payments for the death of the children could help them get out of debt. The prosecution described Darlie as a self-centered woman for whom comfort and money are more important than motherhood. The defense, on the contrary, claimed that the investigation ignored traces of a third party and misinterpreted the evidence. The trial began on January 6, 1997, and lasted a month. The prosecution's main argument was a blood spatter analysis that showed that the marks on Darlie's nightgown matched the movements of a person striking from top to bottom. Forensic expert Vincent DiMaggio, on the other hand, argued that the nature of her wounds indicated an attempt at self-defense rather than self-inflicted wounds. But the decisive factor for the jury was their emotional impression, the footage from the cemetery and Darlie's behavior in court. On February 1st, 1997, the jury found Darlie guilty of the murder of 5-year-old Damon Routier. She was sentenced to death by lethal injection. There was no separate trial for the murder of her older son, Devin. She became one of the few women in Texas history to be sentenced to death by lethal injection. After the verdict, Darlie's lawyers filed multiple appeals. The defense claimed that the investigation had made serious mistakes. An unidentified fingerprint in the house, a blood stain on the door, and a sock found outside pointed to a possible third party. In 2008, the court allowed new DNA tests to be conducted, which are still ongoing, but no decisive results capable of changing the verdict have been obtained yet. Her ex-husband, Darren Routier, has long supported his wife, insisting that she could not have harmed the children. The couple officially divorced in 2011, but Darren still speaks of her with sympathy. Jodi Ann Arias was born on July 9, 1980, in Salinas, California, to William and Sandra Arias. From an early age, she showed creative abilities. She was interested in drawing, music, and photography, and dreamed of becoming an artist. However, her adult life turned out differently. Jodi often changed jobs and places of residence, seeking recognition and love, but each new stage ended in disappointment. Her friends recalled that beneath her gentle exterior lay a quick-tempered and impulsive nature. In September 2006, at a conference in Las Vegas, she met Travis Alexander, a charismatic motivational speaker and salesman for prepaid legal services. He was an energetic, ambitious, and deeply religious man. There was an immediate attraction between them, and within a few months they became a couple. For his sake, Jodi even converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to which Alexander belonged. Their relationship was passionate but full of contradictions, moments of tenderness followed by sharp quarrels and breakups. By 2008, their relationship had begun to crack. Travis began to distance himself, and Jodi could not accept the loss of control. According to his friends, she often called, wrote dozens of messages, and showed up unexpectedly at his home. Alexander tried to end the relationship but remained in contact with her. In the spring of that year, he began dating another woman, which, according to investigators, was the final straw. In early June 2008, Jodi left California for Arizona, telling her friends that she was going to a business meeting, but her journey led her to Travis's house in Mesa. On June 4th, they spent almost the entire day together, having breakfast, taking photos, talking. The last photos on Travis's camera, taken at 5:30 p.m., showed him in the shower. A few minutes later, he was dead. 5 days later, friends, concerned about the lack of communication, came to the house and discovered a horrific scene. Travis's body in the shower, signs of a struggle, blood on the walls. The police quickly tracked down Jodi. A damaged camera was found in the washing machine. The recovered images made it clear that Arias had been there on the day of the murder. The photos showed Alexander shortly before his death, followed by blurred images showing a body in the shadow of a person with a camera. When arrested in July 2008, Jodi initially denied that she had been in Arizona. She then claimed that 2 armed men had broken into the house and spared only her. Later, she admitted that she had killed Travis, but in self-defense. The investigation proved otherwise. Before the trip, Arias borrowed a .25 caliber pistol from her grandmother, bought extra gas cans so she wouldn't have to stop at gas stations, and turned off her phone to hide her route. Experts concluded that the attack was premeditated. The trial, which began in 2012, became one of the most high-profile cases of the decade. Prosecutor Juan Martinez described Jodi as a jealous and manipulative woman who was unable to accept rejection. The defense tried to portray her as a victim of abuse, claiming that Alexander had insulted and humiliated her. Jodi herself testified for 18 days in the dock, which is rare for those accused of murder. She cried, recounted the relationship in detail, and asked for forgiveness, but the jury did not believe her remorse. On May 8, 2013, Jodi Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder. The question of punishment was controversial. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision on the death penalty, and the trial had to be repeated. In 2015, the court finally sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Today, Jodi Arias is being held in an Arizona women's prison, where she paints and corresponds with fans. Susan Lee Smith, née Vaughn, was born on September 26, 1971, in the small town of Union, South Carolina. Her childhood was filled with pain and instability. When she was 6 years old, her father committed suicide, leaving the family in a state of emotional turmoil. Susan's mother soon remarried to local businessman Beverly Russell. It later emerged that he had been molesting his stepdaughter for several years. According to psychiatrists, these events deeply distorted her psyche, forming insecurity, dependence on approval, and a constant fear of being abandoned. As a teenager, Susan suffered two serious nervous breakdowns. The first occurred when she was 13. She attempted to take her own life, unable to cope with the pressure from her family. The second occurred at age 18, after a married man with whom she was in a relationship ended it. She barely graduated from school and seemed to seek salvation in marriage. In 1989, Susan married a worker named David Smith. Shortly thereafter, they had two sons, Michael and Alexander. Outwardly, the family seemed normal, but behind the facade lay conflicts, infidelity, and constant outbursts of jealousy. The marriage collapsed, and Susan was left alone with her children. In 1994, after the divorce, Susan began dating Tom Finley, the son of a wealthy local businessman. For her, it was an attempt to build a new, proper life. But Tom soon ended the relationship. In a letter that later became key evidence, he wrote clearly, "You are a wonderful woman, but I don't want to be the father of someone else's children." This rejection was the final blow for Susan. On October 25, 1994, she called the police, sobbing and claiming that an unknown man had stolen her car, with her children strapped into the back seat. According to her, an armed African-American man forced her out of the car at an intersection and then drove away. The story caused a national outcry. Television stations showed footage of a tearful Susan begging for her sons to be returned to her around the clock. Hundreds of volunteers and police officers participated in the search, and support rallies were held across the country. However, investigators noticed inconsistencies. The route she described did not match the surveillance camera recordings. Her emotional reactions seemed unnatural. A lie detector test showed signs of deception. 9 days later, on November 3rd, under pressure from the evidence, Susan confessed. There had been no kidnapping. She herself had driven her car into Lake John D. Long, where her children, strapped in their seat belts, drowned. The car with the bodies was found at a depth of about 12 meters, approximately 30 meters from the shore. At the trial, the defense claimed that Smith suffered from severe depression and dependent personality disorder. Her lawyer, Judy Clark, said that the woman was in a state of emotional collapse and did not realize the consequences of her actions. Psychiatrists confirmed that Susan was in acute crisis and acted under the influence of panic and despair. The prosecution insisted that the act was premeditated. According to the prosecution, her motive was a desire to start a new life without children, in order to win back Finley's affection. After a 3-week trial, the jury found her guilty of double murder. Despite the prosecutor's demands, the death penalty was not imposed. The judge stated that the crime was an act of insane desperation rather than cold-blooded calculation. In July 1995, Susan was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Smith is serving her sentence at Lee Correctional Institution in Greenwood, South Carolina. Her behavior in prison has been the subject of much discussion. Periods of depression were followed by outbursts of aggression. She got into conflicts with guards and was placed in disciplinary isolation twice. In 2000, 2 prison employees were convicted of having intimate relationships with her, after which Susan was transferred to a more restrictive regime. Betty Lou Donovan, better known as Betty Lou Beats, was born on March 12, 1937, in Roxborough, North Carolina. Her life was tragic from the very beginning. After suffering from measles, she partially lost her hearing, an event that made the girl withdrawn, distrustful, and prone to isolation. As a child, Betty claimed that she was sexually abused by her own father, and when her mother was placed in a psychiatric hospital, the 12-year-old girl took on the care of her younger brothers and sisters. In essence, she lost her childhood early on, learning to survive in a world where she had no one to rely on. At the age of 15, Betty married Robert Branson. This was the first step in a series of turbulent and destructive marriages in which arguments, jealousy, and violence became the norm. In total, she was married 6 times, twice to the same man, Bill Lane. Almost every union ended in conflict and attempts at violence. In 1970, Betty shot Lane in the back, claiming she was acting in self-defense. Her husband survived, and to the surprise of those around him, soon remarried her. Their second marriage lasted only a month. Later, Betty tried to run over another husband, Ronnie Treckle, with her car, but he also survived. These episodes painted a disturbing portrait of a woman who solved family problems with a gun in her hands. By the early 1980s, Betty was living in Texas and leading a seemingly normal life. In 1983, she married her 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beats, a respected firefighter from Gun Barrel City. After Jimmy retired, the couple moved to a house on Cedar Creek Lake. On August 6th of that year, Betty called the police and tearfully reported that her husband had not returned from fishing. Rescuers found his boat with heart medication and fishing gear inside, but Bitts himself was nowhere to be found. The area was combed thoroughly, and the story seemed like a tragic accident. Betty willingly participated in the search, playing the role of a grief-stricken widow. However, 2 years later, the investigation took an unexpected turn. The woman's son, Robert Branson, contacted the police and stated that on the night of the disappearance, his mother asked him to leave the house, and when he returned, he saw Jimmy's body lying on the floor. According to him, Betty told him to help hide the body. They buried it in a well in the backyard and then threw a boat into the lake, staging a drowning. In 1985, the police conducted a search of the house. The results shocked even experienced investigators. The remains of Jimmy Don Beats were found in an old wishing well, and the body of another man was found in the garage. It turned out to be Doyle Wayne Barker, Betty's 4th husband, who had disappeared several years earlier. Forensic examination showed that both men had been shot with the same .38 caliber revolver. At the trial, Betty denied her guilt and tried to shift the blame onto her son, claiming that the murders were the result of family conflicts and not her actions. But Robert's testimony, as well as forensic evidence and financial documents, convinced the jury otherwise. The prosecution presented her as a woman who killed for insurance payments and pension money. Jimmy Beats had taken out a large insurance policy shortly before his death, with Betty as the sole beneficiary. On October 11, 1985, the court found her guilty of murder with mercenary motives and sentenced her to death. At that time, this was a rare case for a woman in Texas. Betty spent the next 15 years on death row in the women's section of the Mountain View Unit prison. Her lawyers unsuccessfully sought a review of the sentence, citing mental illness, a traumatic past, and her partial deafness. The U.S. Supreme Court refused to intervene. Despite attempts by the defense to obtain a pardon, Governor George W. Bush rejected the request. Pamela Marie Hupp, née Newman, was born on October 10, 1958, in a suburb of St. Louis, Missouri. She grew up in a middle-class family that valued traditional values and hard work. At Riverview Gardens High School, Pam was considered a quiet, disciplined, and diligent student, but her classmates recalled that her outward friendliness hid a tendency to manipulate others. After school, she worked in insurance, where she was repeatedly accused of forging clients' signatures, which led to her being fired several times. Over the years, Hap developed a special image, that of a friendly woman ready to help anyone in need of support. But behind this facade was a skilled manipulator, accustomed to using the trust of those around her to her own advantage. By the 2000s, Pam was living in O'Fallon with her husband Mark. Formerly, she was unemployed, claiming to suffer from chronic pain and receiving disability benefits. But in reality, her name became known throughout the country because of a series of mysterious deaths. Her friend Betsy Faria, a man named Louis Gumpenberger, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the death of her mother. Pam Hupp's story began with her friendship with Betsy Faria, a woman who was seriously ill with cancer. In December 2011, just a few days before the tragedy, Betsy unexpectedly rewrote her insurance policy, naming Pam as the sole beneficiary instead of her husband. On December 27th, Betsy was found dead in her own home. She had been stabbed dozens of times. The last person to see her alive was Hap, who insisted on driving her weakened friend home after chemotherapy. Despite numerous inconsistencies in Pam's testimony and obvious signs of staging, suspicion fell on Betsy's husband, Russ Faria. Pam appeared in court in 2013 as a grieving friend and the prosecution's main witness. The jury believed her, and Faria was sentenced to life in prison. But the truth came out later. In 2015, an independent investigation revealed that key evidence pointing to Hupp had been ignored by the police. Pam's phone was near Betsy's house at the time of the murder, and shortly after her death, she cashed in on the insurance payout. Faria was completely exonerated, and the media and prosecutors turned their attention back to the mysterious family friend. Meanwhile, Hap decided to take preemptive action. In August 2016, she called 911, reporting that she had been attacked by an armed man. When the police arrived, they found the body of Louis Gumpenberger, a disabled man who had been in an accident. According to Pam, she shot him in self-defense. However, the scene looked implausible. $900 bills and a note mentioning Russ and instructing her to do everything like he did to his wife were found next to the body. The investigation revealed that Hupp herself had lured the man to her home under the pretext of participating in the filming of the television show Dateline NBC, promising to pay for a reenactment of the crime. The serial numbers on the bills, found next to the body, matched those of the money in her home. The investigation concluded that she had staged the attack to frame the acquitted Faria and divert attention from the investigation into Betsy's murder. On August 23, 2016, Pam was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Already at the police station, she attempted suicide by cutting herself with a pen. Despite attempts to feign remorse, the evidence was irrefutable. In 2019, to avoid the death penalty, she entered into an Alford plea agreement, not directly admitting guilt, but agreeing that the evidence against her was sufficient for a guilty verdict. The court sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, and she was sent to the Chillicothe Correctional Center in Missouri. Margie Velma Barfield, née Bullard, was born on October 29, 1932, in Eastover, North Carolina, and grew up near Fayetteville. Her childhood was marked by fear. Her father was a rough and quick-tempered man who often raised his hand to his children, and her mother, unable to stand up to him, remained indifferent. To escape this environment, Velma married early in 1949 to Thomas Burke. The young couple soon had 2 children and initially lived a quiet life, but their family happiness was short-lived. After surgery, Velma began to suffer from chronic pain and gradually became addicted to painkillers. Her personality changed. She became irritable, withdrawn, and prone to sudden mood swings. Thomas, in turn, became addicted to alcohol, and their relationship began to fall apart. In April 1969, the family home burned to the ground, and Thomas died in the fire. At the time, it was considered an accident, although investigators later suggested otherwise. A year later, Velma remarried Jennings Barfield, a widower from a neighboring town. But this marriage also did not last long. A year later, her husband died of a heart attack. Later, an examination showed traces of arsenic in his body, but at the time, his death was ruled natural. By the mid-1970s, Barfield's life had turned into a series of misfortunes. She became increasingly addicted to drugs, forged checks, and took on debts she could not repay. In 1974, her mother, Lillian Bullard, suddenly fell ill with severe nausea, vomiting, and convulsions. A few days later, the woman died. At the time, the death was attributed to illness, but later Velma confessed that she had added poison to her mother's food. In 1976, Barfield got a job as a caregiver for an elderly couple, Montgomery and Dolly Edwards. First, the husband died, and soon after, his wife. Both complained of stomach pains, but doctors decided it was an infection. After their deaths, Velma found a new job caring for an elderly woman named Record Lee. A few weeks later, her husband, John Henry Lee, also died after sudden bouts of pain. Barfield later confessed that she had been putting rat poison in her patient's food. Her last victim was her boyfriend, Roland Stewart Taylor. He began to suspect Velma of financial fraud and wanted to report it to the police. The woman then decided to prevent a scandal and mixed arsenic into his beer and tea. When Taylor died, the autopsy revealed traces of poisoning, and this time she was unable to hide the truth. In February 1978, Barfield was arrested. She confessed to several murders, including those of her mother and elderly patients, but only Taylor's case was considered in court, where the evidence was irrefutable. The court sentenced Velma to death. She became the first woman in North Carolina to be placed on the death row after the reinstatement of the death penalty in the United States in 1976. There was no women's wing at the time, so she was held separately under constant surveillance. While in prison, Barfield underwent a spiritual transformation. She converted to Christianity, actively participated in religious programs, and began helping other inmates. Her conversion to faith caused a wide public response. The famous preacher Billy Graham called her a person who found God in the darkness. Religious organizations petitioned to have her death sentence commuted to life imprisonment. Psychiatrists also attempted to prove that Velma suffered from dissociative identity disorder. Renowned expert Dorothy Ottenall Lewis claimed that Barfield had alter personalities, one of which, Billy, allegedly took responsibility for the crimes. However, the court did not accept this testimony as grounds for reviewing the case. Dana Sue Gray was born on December 6, 1957 in Pasadena, California, to Beverly Arnett and Russell Armbrust. Her mother, a former beauty queen and MGM studio model, was ambitious and quick-tempered, while her father, a hairdresser by profession, had been married 3 times by the time his daughter was born. Their marriage broke up when Dana was 2 years old. The girl stayed with her mother, who often lashed out at her child, demanding impeccable behavior and success. Gray's childhood was spent under constant pressure. She learned early on to manipulate in order to earn approval. At school, Dana was known for her inconsistency, irritability, and tendency to get into conflicts. Her classmates recalled that she easily lost friends and often got into fights. When she was 14, her mother fell seriously ill with breast cancer, and for the first time, Dana faced loss and the fear of death. After her mother's death in 1975, she moved in with her father, but was soon kicked out of the house when her stepmother found drugs in her possession. Despite her difficult past, Gray decided to become a nurse. She graduated from nursing school in 1981 and got a job at Riverside County Hospital. Colleagues described her as an attractive, energetic, but emotionally unstable woman prone to narcissism. In her free time, Dana loved shopping, fashion, and outdoor activities. She windsurfed, skied, and traveled to Hawaii. In 1987, she married athlete Tom Gray. Their life seemed to be the embodiment of the American dream, a country house, shared hobbies, good looks. But behind this picture lay debts and a strained relationship. Dana quarreled with her husband more and more often, and her passion for shopping turned into an addiction. By the early 1990s, her financial problems had worsened. Gray took out loans, forged signatures, and later began stealing. In 1993, she was fired from the hospital for stealing drugs. After divorcing Tom, she moved in with her new lover, Jim Wilkins. but soon found herself without a job or money. It was then, according to investigators, that Dana crossed the line. On February 14, 1994, she went to the home of 86-year-old Norma Davis, a woman she knew through family acquaintances. 2 days later, a neighbor found Davis's body with stab wounds to her neck and chest. There were no signs of forced entry, which indicated that the killer was known to the victim. 2 weeks later, on February 28th, 66-year-old June Roberts was killed. Dana came to her house under the pretext of borrowing a book, strangled her with a telephone cord, and stole her credit cards. A few hours later, Gray spent the money in Temecula boutiques, buying designer clothes and cosmetics. Surveillance cameras recorded her, but the woman's identity has not yet been established. On March 10, she attacked 57-year-old Dorinda Hawkins in an antique store, trying to strangle her. Hawkins miraculously survived and was later able to describe her attacker. A few days later, on March 16th, Gray attacked again, this time targeting 87-year-old Dora Bibb. She entered her home under the pretext of asking for directions, killed and robbed her, and then went shopping again. By March 1994, panic had gripped the Canyon Lake area. Elderly women locked themselves in their homes, afraid to let even their neighbors in. The police determined that the victim's credit cards were being actively used in stores. Salespeople described the shopper as a slender blonde, often with a little boy. Detective Joseph Greco matched this description to Dana Gray, the stepdaughter of Jerry Armbrust, a friend of the first victim. On March 17, 1994, police arrested Gray at her home on Lake Elsinore. During a search, they found items, documents, and bank cards belonging to the victims. During questioning, she initially denied everything, then became confused in her testimony, and finally confessed to avoid the death penalty. In 1998, the court sentenced Dana Sue Gray to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Kimberly Clark Sayans, née Fowler, was born on November 3, 1973, in Fall River, Massachusetts. Her life was difficult from the start. As a teenager, she became pregnant by her high school sweetheart, dropped out of school, and faced the challenges of adulthood at an early age. Despite this, Kimberly later obtained her high school diploma and graduated from Angelina College in Lufkin, Texas, where she received her professional nursing license. According to her acquaintances, Sayans tried to project an image of a confident and successful woman, but behind this facade lay flashes of irritability, irresponsibility, and a tendency to deceive. After starting her career in the medical field, Kimberly quickly earned a questionable reputation. She was fired several times, including from Woodland Heights Hospital, where she was caught stealing Demerol painkillers and attempting to falsify a drug test. But despite her disciplinary violations, in 2007, Sayans found work again as a nurse at the DaVita Dialysis Center in Lufkin. By that time, she already had a family, a husband, 2 children, and a marriage marred by quarrels and alcohol abuse. In the spring of 2008, strange things began to happen at the clinic. Patients who had been undergoing hemodialysis procedures for years suddenly began to lose consciousness and experience cardiac arrest right in the middle of their treatments. In April alone, ambulances were called to the center more than 30 times, whereas such calls had previously been rare. The first deaths occurred on April 1st. 49-year-old Thelma Metcalf and 80-year-old Clara Strange died. Company management sent an internal inspector to investigate, but the number of incidents only increased. Paramedics and clinic staff began to notice an alarming pattern. Almost all of the incidents occurred during Sayans' shift. Witnesses said they saw her drawing liquid into syringes and injecting it into dialysis lines. When the center's coordinator, Amy Clinton, asked what she was doing, Sayans calmly replied that she was cleaning the equipment, allegedly with bleach. This method was a clear violation of safety protocol. An inspection revealed that the bucket Kimberly had been using contained traces of chlorine solution, and the syringes found were soaked in the same substance. At the end of April, inspectors from the Department of Health arrived at the clinic. Before their eyes, two patients, Marva Ron and Carolyn Rasinger, suddenly lost consciousness during the procedure. After that, the DeVita Center was immediately closed and Sayans was fired. A police investigation confirmed that Kimberly was present during all critical incidents when patients died or experienced clinical death. In addition, an analysis of her computer revealed disturbing search queries, such as, "Can bleach kill a person?" When she was called in for questioning, Sayans herself mentioned the use of bleach before investigators asked the question, effectively incriminating herself. To determine the cause of death, investigators needed special laboratory tests. Chemist Mark Sohaski from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention developed a method for detecting chlorine in the blood. All of the victims were found to have chlorotyrosine, a compound that forms when chlorine-containing substances enter the body. This compound caused the destruction of red blood cells and cardiac arrest. In May 2008, Sayans was arrested. The Angelina County District Attorney's Office charged her with 5 counts of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder. The victims included Clara Strange, Thelma Metcalf, Garland Kelly, Cora Bryant, and Opal Fye. 5 other people survived, but suffered serious health damage. Colleagues later admitted that Sayans often expressed dislike for some patients, calling them capricious and demanding.